Hey everyone, welcome back to Small Batch Devs. My name is Austin.
And I'm Elliot. Today we're going to be taking a more in-depth look at Firebase Authentication. We're also going to be incorporating the Firebase UI library into our existing blog application.
And if you enjoyed this video or you learned a thing or two, make sure to subscribe to our channel or leave a comment down below of things you enjoyed or things you think we should do better. It would really help us out a lot and we would definitely appreciate it. But without any further ado, let's hop into it.
So Austin, tell us a little bit about Firebase Authentication.
So Firebase Authentication is a service provided by Firebase that allows us to have a way of allowing our users to log into our applications through federated identity providers such as Google, Twitter, Facebook, GitHub. As of pretty recently, Apple ID, and there are also several other providers.
You can also choose to allow your users to sign in with just plain old email and password, or even their phone numbers if you want to.
Firebase also provides Firebase UI, which is a library SDK that will allow us to create nice looking UIs on our front end, just using their SDK for all these identity providers.
It's super handy and really easy to use. So why would I want to use Firebase's authentication?
So we'd want to use Firebase's authentication because it offers a pre-built, proper, and secure authentication service, which is really a must in almost any modern day application.
Firebase provides a simple way for us developers to ensure that our users' authentication info is secure. And this means we don't have to develop a whole authentication service on our own.
And it does all this by leveraging OAuth 2.0 and OpenID Connect standards.
Nice. Firebase is also great at handling the user's session in your app for you, so you don't have to keep track of whether they're signed in or signed out. It will automatically do this for you.
And as we mentioned before, Firebase provides a simple-to-use SDK for interfacing with these identity providers on all platforms. So web, iOS, Android, you'll be covered.
Another really interesting feature of Firebase Authentication is it will allow you to log in your users anonymously. So if you don't want to collect any type of email or additional username from another service, you can let them log in anonymously.
As far as installation goes, if you already have Firebase and the Firebase CLI tools installed, which we have done several times in many other episodes, so we'll link those down in the description. But anyways, the other packages that we need to install for this episode is Firebase UI and Firebase UI Angular, which is a wrapper around Firebase UI. And to do that, we will put the command right here. It is npm install Firebase UI, Firebase UI Angular -- save. And then you should be good to go with the Firebase UI tutorial portion, which we'll be doing later. You could also add Firebase UI and Firebase UI Angular to your package.json and specify a version and run npm install and do it that way.
So get installing.
Get installing.
So now let's jump into the demo for the video, and we're going to start off in the Firebase console on the Authentication tab. And you can get to the Authentication tab by clicking on this little people button on the left side of the screen. So the first tab in this screen is the Users tab, and this is going to show you a list of all of your application's users along with their user IDs as given to you by Firebase. You won't be able to see their passwords, but you can manage them in there. You can delete or add. You can also see what identity providers they've signed up with. The second tab here is the sign-in method, and this is more of a configuration page for your application. It will allow you to turn on or off and set up different identity providers that your users can then log in with. The third tab is your templates, and this is just a templating page for emails for password reset or other account level emails that you can send through Firebase. And the last tab is your usage, and this is going to show you your authentication usage that you can then compare with the billing and see how much it's going to cost you if you surpass the free tier.
For this episode, we're going to be focusing on our sign-in methods. You can see here there are many different identity providers that we can choose from. We do already have Google enabled. That one is very simple. You can just toggle the enable button. And we're going to be enabling email password and setting up code for that, and also GitHub. The reason we're only doing GitHub and not Facebook and Twitter or Apple ID as well is these provide you to set up developer accounts through the identity providers. And GitHub is the most simple in our opinion to do. But we will provide links in the description for where you set up your developer account. Facebook and Twitter are also somewhat similar, and Apple, unfortunately, to create a developer account, I believe you also need to pay to do that. I think it's like $99 a year or something like that. But if that's something you want to do, by all means, go and do it. Anyways, go ahead and enable our email and password. This one is very simple. You just edit the entry and hit enable. You can also enable email link, which is a passwordless sign-in, but we're not going to do that today. And you can see that now that is enabled. The next one we're going to enable is GitHub, and you can see here there's a few things we need. Our client ID and client secret, and those will come when you create a application through GitHub. If you follow one of the links that we provide down below, you will go to the GitHub page and create a developer application and just provide some information. You'll need to give it the callback URL as well, and then once you're done with that, it will give you a client ID and client secret. We're not going to show you how to do that in this specific episode. It's pretty simple, just because we'll be providing it will show a private ID and secret, and we don't want to show everybody that. But believe me, it's fairly simple. We'll provide the link to that page, and I'm sure you'll figure it out.
So get started. So before we get started with the actual implementation, make sure you jump into your app module TS file and import the Angular Fire Auth library as well as the Angular Fire module. You can see in our imports we've got Angular Fire Auth module, and down in our providers we've got the Angular Fire Auth service. You'll also notice that we also have the Firebase UI module for root call, and this is going to enable us to use Firebase UI later on in this demo, so make sure you stick around for that. Alright, so now let's jump into the code section for this demo. We're here in our authentication service in our blog application, and you can see we've got two sign-in methods on the screen, one for Google and one for GitHub. These are each going to be using the Angular Fire Auth library, which is built into Angular Fire. This is different from the Firebase UI library. This method gives us a little bit more control than the Firebase UI library does, but it's still a very simple solution. So you can see each one is using a sign-in with pop-up that takes a custom provider from the Angular Fire Auth library. So the first one is just going to create a pop-up for a Google sign-in, and the second one's going to create a pop-up for a GitHub sign-in. You can also see that when these sign-ins complete, they're going to give us back the user credentials, which will have the login information as well as a unique identifier that Firebase creates for you. And then we're going to navigate to our home page after they're signed in.
So a little further down in our code, we have a couple of methods for our email login. The first being sign in with email, the second being sign up with email. And as you can imagine, the first one is for signing in, the second one is for signing up. But anyways, in our sign in with email method, we pass it a email and a password. We go ahead and call the Angular Fire Auth sign in with email and password method, pass it those pieces of information, and we get back a user credential. The sign up with email is very simple. We just call the create user with email and password method on the Angular Fire Auth library and give it the email and password, and once again we get a user back.
We get a literal user's back.
So we're now in our login component, and specifically our TypeScript for our login component. And we have a few methods here that correlate to our authentication service methods. So we have a Google login, GitHub login, our email sign up, and our email sign in. And all these really do is just call those service methods, and we'll call these from our HTML. So real quick before we demo our custom login page, I just wanted to show the HTML a little bit. You can see that we have a bunch of divs, but they're actually buttons for our different service providers. Google and GitHub will be enabled. We'll also have a button that will transition to an email login screen. And a little further down in our HTML here is where our email login screen will be. And we just have a couple of input fields, one for the email, one for the password, and then like our login and sign up buttons. This isn't a perfect login page by any means, but it will definitely show what we can do with the Firebase authentication.
So let's dive into that demo. So now we're going to demo the Firebase custom authentication with Firebase Auth. And you can see we're on our amazing blog website. Thank you very much. So we're going to go ahead and hit the login button, and you can see we've got a list of providers with custom styling and custom implementation. So if we click on the first one, sign in with Google, we'll get a pop-up that asks for our Google email and password. And then when you sign in with that, it will then register in your Firebase app as a Google sign-in provider, and you'll have a user created. The next one is GitHub, which we implemented also, and it's a very similar sign-up process, just username, email, password, and again, sign up, create an account, show up in Firebase with that sign-up provider. And the last one is email, and this one is another custom UI here, and this is the email and password that we built and showed you earlier. So if we just create a fake email and password and hit login or sign up, there you go. We get routed to the home page, and we are now signed in as hey@hello.com. How you doing?
So now it's time to go over implementing Firebase UI into our Angular application. Just as a reminder, Firebase UI is a UI library that just leverages Firebase authentication. To do that in our Angular application, remember we have to use Firebase UI-Angular, and that's a wrapper around the Firebase UI SDK. And we'll provide a link to that down below if you want to look at the documentation. As you can see here, we have a config that we're creating, and we actually took this from the documentation. It spells it all out there for you. And this is just to set up the providers that we want to use. We have all of them in our configuration right now, but we're only going to be using, or we'll only be able to use the email password, the Google, and the GitHub, because that is what we enabled through Firebase. But you'll get to see all of the nice little UI buttons on our page, so we just left them all in there. You also can add a terms of service URL and a privacy policy URL in here if that's something you need. Just as a quick note, further down in our appmodule.ts file, we went over this earlier, but just to recap, we have a Firebase UI module that we're pointing to here and passing in the that config that we just created up above. Another thing you got to do before you get the Firebase UI working in your application is in your root level styles.scss file, add this Firebase UI import just so we can actually use those UI styling sheets.
So the last thing we need to set up is our Firebase UI component. And we're here in the components HTML, and it's pretty simple, I know. All we're doing is creating these divs that give it a little bit of styling and a Firebase UI element tag. And what this is going to do is it's going to initialize and run the Firebase UI library. And this is going to handle everything for us. There is nothing to do in your components TypeScript file. This will take care of everything.
So now it's time to demo our Firebase UI login page. If we click our link that takes us there, you'll see we have a nice, beautiful Firebase UI login page. The main thing to point out here is that all of this right here is what just came with that one element tag, the Firebase UI element tag. There's a little bit around it, but that is less beautiful. Anyways,
it's pretty sweet.
Yeah. If we click on some of these links now to attempt to log in, we'll get our pop-ups like we did with the custom login page. There's a little more involved in the Firebase UI one though. So if we try to click on one that doesn't exist, it'll be like, hey, the identity provider configuration is not found because we didn't set it up. Also, if we try to sign in with email, it has a nice little material design. And this all comes with that Firebase UI library. And we can log in with a new email here. We'll just give it a simple password. It needs to be a strong password. That's cool.
Built in.
All built in. And we're logged in, I think.
Nice.
Nice.
And so another quick note is that if you don't want any of those providers to show up, all you have to do is take out of the configuration in your app module TS that one line, and it'll disappear.
True that. So today we talked about Firebase Authentication, what it is, and why you should use it in your application.
We then showed you how to implement the Angular Fire Authentication service for a custom UI and login process. Next, we went over the Firebase UI library for a pre-built UI and login page.
Thank you very much for watching the video. We hope you enjoyed it and learned something. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. And also check us out on social media. That includes Twitter, Facebook, and the Gram. Anyways, thanks for watching.
Peace.